Welcome, and thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Kiana Faircloth. That's right, we're back with a brand new episode of Studio 901, and we are excited to continue the custom of spotlighting local, emerging, and established artists that are creating right here in the DMV. With us, you'll discover some of the area's greatest treasures, some of our best-kept secrets, and hear some never-before-told stories about living the creative life. And if you don't know, this show is GCTV's greatest exploration of the art that is among us. Joining me today on Studio 901 is Noah Getz. Noah Getz is a jazz and classical saxophonist based in Washington, D.C. Hailed as a highly skillful and an even more highly adventurous player, says the Washington City paper, Noah Getz has performed and lectured worldwide, including appearances at the Melbourne Recital Center, Carnegie Hall, Zilka Hall, the Phillips Collection, and the 2012 Polish Woodwind Festival in Wolsztyn, Poland. He was awarded a 2015 Artist Fellowship by the D.C. Commission on the Arts and Humanities for significant contributions to the cultural life of the District of Columbia. An avid chamber musician, Getz is a member of the National Gallery New Music Ensemble and has performed with the 21st Century Consort, the Empyrean Ensemble, and members of the International Contemporary Ensemble. He received a first-round Grammy nomination with the New Hudson Saxophone Quartet. He has performed frequently with orchestras throughout the country, including the New World Symphony Orchestra, Juilliard Orchestra, Manhattan School of Music Orchestra, Oberlin Orchestra, Harrisburg Symphony, and the Columbia University Orchestra. His concerto performance of Ode to Lord Buckley is featured in the movie David Amram, The First 80 Years, and his albums, Crosscurrents, exploring the intersection of jazz and classical music, and Still Life were released to rave reviews. Getz was the first saxophonist given permission to perform Henry Brandt's Concerto for Alto Saxophone and Orchestra in 50 years after extensive work with the composer. He has presented master classes, recitals, and lectures across the country, including at the Peabody Conservatory, Mannes, the New School of Music, and the Aaron Copland School of Music. In 2014, Getz presented a performance of the piano reduction of Henry Brandt's Concerto at the University of Illinois in conjunction with his release of this version by Carl Fischer, for which he wrote the foreword. He is a musician in residence at American University right here in D.C. Welcome to Studio 901, Noah Getz.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. At Studio 901, we always ask our guests right off the bat, at what age did you begin doing what you do?
I started playing the saxophone when I was about 12 years old through the school music program, and it's kind of a funny story because the band program didn't have a saxophone, but my father had found one. I was interested in the music that my father was listening to, which was 50s rock and roll that had a lot of saxophone in it. And so naturally I was drawn to the instrument at that point in time. Starting a couple years later than the other students, I had some catching up to do. And,
yeah, starting at 12 is almost a little late.
Almost a little late. And so I was fortunate. The band director was a saxophonist himself, kind of took me under his wing, and we worked together for at sort of an advanced pace, and I just kept going at that speed and just found very quickly that it was a thing that I loved and that I really wanted to make my life's work, I guess you would say.
Wow, so you knew from then, you sort of blazed trails being the first saxophonist in the band, huh?
Something like that, yeah, I knew early on, absolutely.
Who are you inspired by musically? Starting then, you said the 50s music. Now,
Yes.
who are you inspired by musically?
Oh, that's a great question. You know, there are really so many. You know, in the jazz tradition, I would be saying the same names that most people would. You know, I think Chris Potter is fantastic today, and Josh Redman for different reasons. Coltrane is sort of you know an amazing figure you know in this music, and you know there are just so many, and you sort of return to them over and over again. I find myself sort of moving up and down the history, in particular in jazz, of returning to an earlier time and finding inspiration there, and then fast forwarding to contemporary musicians and how they're interpreting the music to find more advanced language and what's happening today. So I find myself moving in that direction that way. And in terms of classical playing, I'm very inspired by those that are composing today, and in particular, I'm inspired by collaboration. I would say as much as anything. That's really something that is compelling to me, interests me, and is something I can play off of. Whether it's improvising with other musicians or working with a composer on a new piece that they might be writing for me. That interactive piece where two artists or three or four artists are coming together in a collaborative environment is really fascinating to me, and one of the great elements of being a musician, I feel.
And for you, being a part of both the jazz and classical worlds, have you found that those two genres, well, obviously they merge for you, but in the professional realm, have they merged for you very often, the jazz and classical genres?
I would say that this is a constant challenge. Actually, as you know, there have been a number of people who maybe have tried this to varying degrees of success.
Yeah.
And I know many of those both performers and composers who have attempted that over time. But I find it really fascinating and interesting. It's compelling to me to practice both of these styles. I find that they do coexist fairly comfortably in my life in terms of my teaching and playing. And I find myself returning to one and the other, sort of bouncing back and forth, I guess, a bit, both in terms of my performing schedule that tends to sort of go back and forth, and also in terms of my practice schedule. This fall I had a lot of classical and contemporary classical kind of playing, and so over the break I decided that it was time to dive back into some standards, and I spent nearly the entire break practicing and focusing on jazz again. So they kind of live together for me, and
they coexist for you, which is rare. Rare.
Yeah, they do, and I find it to be really, again, very fascinating, really interesting.
Awesome. What made you want to play the saxophone, and is this something that you always wanted to do, even before your dad found that saxophone?
That's a great question. I'm not sure that, I listen to, as I said, basically my foundational music, the stuff that my parents listened to when I was very young was rock and roll. And I'm not sure that the saxophone was necessarily the thing that drew me right away. But certainly over time it did, and by the time it did, it was very much something that was a focus. And as I grew to know more about the instrument, I grew to love more of the repertoire and of the music that's played by it.
So it doesn't sound like you necessarily come from a family of musicians, just people who appreciate music then?
Yes, very true. That's absolutely the truth.
Very cool that you have now made this your career then.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Now you have a few CDs that we can talk about. One that I'm really interested in is Crosscurrents. Talk to us a little bit about how you've, like we talked about before, blended those worlds of jazz and classical into Crosscurrents.
Sure. So Crosscurrents, the idea for Crosscurrents was to bring together the world of classical music and jazz. And over the course of my graduate studies and early professional career, I found a number of composers who were blurring those lines. And I became very fascinated with that music. Much of Crosscurrents is a, there are parts of Crosscurrents that are improvised, but a lot of it is written. And stylistically impacts jazz in a variety of ways. Some pieces require me to play on a jazz setup with sections that are composed or improvised. Other sections of the music have me playing on a classical setup, but are more freely composed. And so that was the focus. I would say, sort of for me, there are kind of two pieces that really spring to mind when I think of Crosscurrents. One of those pieces is written by an Australian composer named Andrian Pertut, called Digressioni Modali, and it's a piece that's a modal piece. It really has a kind of jazz modal kind of feel for piano and tenor. And then the other piece is a piece written by a composer who came out of, I believe it was called the Red Sneaker Group, that was based at Eastman. And he wrote a piece called Chasing the Train out of Darmstadt. And so the Chasing the Train part is a Coltrane reference.
Yeah.
And the Darmstadt reference is of a lot of contemporary composers post-World War II in Europe who were writing very pointillistic kind of music. And so to me, the idea of mixing those two things was extremely fascinating.
Yeah.
And just really wild. And so I played that piece, I played with that piece for a while, and I just felt like those two pieces sort of set me up for this
For Crosscurrents.
for this journey. Yeah,
Cool.
that was Crosscurrents.
Very cool. Well, when we come back, we'll talk more with Noah Getz about his life as a professional saxophonist. Stay right there.
When I was 6, I had one thing on my mind. When I was 6, my days were spent playing basketball every chance I could. When I was 6, my dream was to make it to the NBA. When I was 6, my mom had a stroke. I'm Paul George, and I want you to learn the signs of a stroke fast. F-A-S-T. F, face drooping. A, arm weakness. S, speech difficulty. T, time to call 911. Because the sooner they get to the hospital, the sooner they'll get treatment. And that can make a remarkable difference in their recovery. Protect the ones you love. Spot a stroke. F-A-S-T. Fast.
Welcome back to Studio 901. I'm chatting with saxophonist Noah Getz. Now, Noah, we know that living a life as a musician can sometimes be a struggle. You know, I can't think of a different word for that. But for you, how have you managed to stay afloat both personally and professionally as a musician?
Well, it's true. It's no secret that that this can be challenging to pull it together. I've found it to be. I've found that in my life I've been fortunate to have opportunities not only for an education that has allowed me to really grow my strengths, but also the support of people that are interested in what I'm doing, and
Support is key.
yeah, support is key. You know, from a practical perspective, my funding comes from both teaching, performances that I do, and also I'm fairly active in grant writing. I found the DC Commission to be a really excellent resource.
Yeah.
They've been wonderful to me and a number of other people that I've known, and a great lifeline for those of us who are really interested in keeping the artistic life in DC healthy with new and interesting things. So, you know, being an active performer and musician requires a lot of book work. It requires a lot of organization, and it requires a real drive to be an entrepreneur, basically. So I find it challenging, but I do find it rewarding, and I think that it really forces you to become better in a lot of areas of your life. And that, I think, has been all to the good, really, for me.
Absolutely. You know, you mentioned a key point, being an entrepreneur as a musician. Is that something that you would, I guess, give advice to an up-and-coming musician to really solidify their skills business-wise so that they can, you know, be more successful?
Absolutely. No question about it. In my residency at American University, I'm constantly talking to those students that are interested in the possibility of doing this in the future. I think that at the college level, the goal is really to hone the skill set, but beyond college, the thing that we need to help young artists understand is that they need to find ways of expanding their network of other artists, as well as finding ways of cultivating an audience and an interest in what they're doing. Those things don't come overnight, and they don't come without a lot of hard work and energy given to those things. And in the vacuum of higher education, it's hard to realize that.
Yeah.
And so when you leave, especially if you've been working very hard and you're a very good artist of some kind, you anticipate that things will naturally fall into place.
Right.
But that's not the case
No.
typically. So you really do need both parts. And I think finding your space, finding where, and the other thing that I feel that I've learned over time is that the place where we become successful, I think, is where we are giving back authentically to the community that we live in. That's when we become supported. If you're if the artistry that you're creating is really meaningful and impactful, not just popular but meaningful, it's something that will be supported. If you're teaching, you're gaining a network of
teaching is also a way of giving back. So
absolutely, it's a way of giving back, and so it's important to think about how your artistry, both as an educator and as a performer and as an entrepreneur, is something that can give back to the community. Another thing I've been intrigued by lately and trying to put some effort into is creating some performances, some small music series in the DC area.
Okay.
And some of that has to do with drawing that network of professionals that I respect and value, both performing with them and giving them an avenue of expression and helping them financially as well. So,
awesome.
So we all, when we help each other, everyone is helped and everyone is benefited.
So music is the gift that keeps on giving, then, right? Okay, awesome. Right. Let's talk a little bit about your musician in residence at the American University a little bit.
Sure.
Tell us about that.
Okay, so I am in residence at American University, where I teach jazz and classical saxophone to the musicians that are interested in studying that there. I also have been teaching the saxophone quartet and chamber music during my time there. And another piece of this puzzle that we're talking about in terms of the creativity, entrepreneurial piece of it, I created an ensemble at AU called the Workshop. Originally it was the Jazz Workshop. I've chopped that name off. Now it's the Workshop because I wanted it to be flexible to the arranging, composing, writing, and performing of those students that I have at the time. And so we create completely different programs each semester that focus on the strengths of the students, their interests, and to help them to start to cultivate a perspective, an artistic perspective, as they grow and begin to move on to either their graduate programs or into the workforce or into the arts community.
Sounds like an incubator, a little bit, like a place where they can sort of develop their sound.
Yeah,
nice.
That's the goal.
Okay.
And so it's moved in a lot of different directions, but we've had some really fascinating and exciting programs, and I enjoy working with the students with that quite a lot.
All right, awesome. Well, when we come back, we'll talk more with Noah Getz. Stay right there. This is Studio 901.
The inherent right to work is one of the elemental privileges of a free people. Endowed, as our nation is, with abundant physical resources, and inspired as it should be with the high purpose to make those resources and opportunities available for the enjoyment of all. We approach this problem of re-employment with the real hope of finding a better answer than we have now.
Welcome back to Studio 901. I'm here with professional saxophonist Noah Getz. Now, earlier in the intro, Noah, we mentioned that you got a chance to work with composer Henry Brandt. So you were the first saxophonist given permission to perform his concerto for alto sax?
That's correct, in 50 years.
In 50 years?
Yes.
So tell us how that came about and why were you chosen of all people?
It's a great question. Well, we were talking about the entrepreneurial spirit and the drive earlier.
Yeah.
I think that's how it came about.
Wow,
So,
awesome.
So the piece was originally written in the 1940s for a saxophonist named Sigurd Rascher, who performed it a number of times and then recorded it. it had a number of extended techniques and challenging things in it that were written specifically for Rasher.
Okay.
That after Rasher stopped playing the piece, no one else had sort of developed those skill sets. And so Henry Brandt decided to pull the piece from the market until he found someone that he felt could emulate and play those things.
Huh.
And so I was looking for a. I learned of the piece during my master's, and it was this sort of enigma. And when I got to my doctoral studies, everyone had said that this composer was someone that was unapproachable. He was just a composer that wanted to pull his piece, wasn't interested in having anyone play it. In other words, there was a stop sign there.
Right.
Don't enter kind of thing. And I thought, well, no one seems to be reaching out to this person. Let me contact him and find out. So I reached out to him.
How did you find him?
He was living in California. He wasn't that hard to find, actually. He was a well-known composer, had worked on several movie scores, including Cleopatra, and so really had grown a really nice career for himself and was in retirement at that point. So I reached out to him, and he was intrigued. I sent him some of my playing. He wrote back, sent me a piece of the concerto and said, record this and send it back to me. So I did that. And
so basically, let me see what you got.
Let me see what you got.
See if you can do this.
Exactly. And we did this a couple times, actually. So he was a little tough. He was kind of a tough nut to crack. But then ultimately, I sent him the more complicated sections of the piece that he had sent to me. I recorded it, sent it back. And it must have been within the day that he got it. He gave me a call and said, can you fly out to California and take lessons with me on this piece? And so my answer was yes. And it became my dissertation. And also a bit of a lifelong I wanted to say mandate. I'm not sure that's quite right, but a lifelong goal, I would say, to fulfill those lessons that we took by recording the piece. And that's something that I'm still pursuing, actually, to find the right orchestra and the right set of circumstances to record that for Brandt, so that so others who hear this piece can understand exactly what Brandt was looking for and sort of put that whole piece of it to rest. So that continues to be a goal and a passion of mine. So I continue to work towards that with this piece.
Awesome. So you're sort of becoming a Brandt expert then.
That's right. Yes.
Wow. That's right. Pretty impressive.
Thank you.
Pretty impressive. Now, tell the folks where they can find out more about you and they can get in contact with you.
Sure. That's quite easy. My website is noahgetz.com, and I have a lot of information on there, not only about what I've done, but what's coming up. I keep my calendar up to date quite well. I'm also on Facebook, and so definitely reach out to me. There's a lot of exciting things coming up in the spring and planning already in the fall, and so there's an awful lot, both in the DC area and around the country to see. So it should be very exciting. I'm looking forward to it.
And folks can find out more about the works, the projects that you've put out and things through your website and all that.
That's
so
correct.
There's Crosscurrents, and then there's Still Life as well.
That's right.
Okay, awesome.
Yep. And I'll be participating on a number of composers' CDs that will be coming out within the next year or two. That will also be posted up there. One or two pieces on these CDs, pieces that were written for me, and I'm sort of helping them with their recordings.
Awesome.
So there'll be a lot to see and a lot to check out.
You know, this has really been a great interview. I find you so fascinating that you have merged the jazz and classical worlds, which me as a pianist I've not been able to do. So kudos. My hat goes off to you, Noah. Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Do you mind playing a little something for us?
Sure. Well, why don't I go ahead and just kind of do some of those things. I'll do some improvisation that sort of blends these two styles in a way.
Thank you so much. That was cool, so cool.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. You're watching Studio 901 on DCTV.
When they test you, stand firm and move only when you hear the seatbelt click that says they're buckled in for the drive. Never give up till they buckle up.
Thank you for tuning in to Studio 901. It's been such a treat sitting down and talking with Noah Getz. He is someone without a doubt that you should keep an eye out for because he's playing classical saxophone like nobody else in this area, and jazz. Remember, Studio 901 spotlights emerging artists from all over the DMV that are creating and performing right here in our own backyard. If you want to find out more about what you saw today, hit us up on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook at YourDCTV, or visit our website at dctv.org. Before you leave, I want to leave you with this quote from American writer William Faulkner. "The aim of every artist is to arrest motion, which is life, by artificial means and hold it fixed so that 100 years later, when a stranger looks at it, it moves again, since it is life." Join us for another episode of Studio 901, where we just might spotlight you. I'm Kiana Faircloth. Until next time.